If there's one thing that really knocks me out, it's how people love to pretend they're helpless when they're actually just selfish. Bus terminals are full of those kinds of phonies. I'm Sophia Armstrong. I run the logistics for this whole goddamn city, now sitting in a glass tower like I own the place. But I wasn't always the boss. 20 years ago, I was just a 14-year-old kid shivering on a plastic bench, watching my own father drive away in a warm taxi because I was too much extra baggage for his new life. It's depressing as hell if you think about it. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spend here with us. Anyway, tonight the security cameras caught something that really woke me up. They call this room the aquarium. It is a soundproofed glass box floating 3 stories above the main concourse of the Metropolitan Transit Terminal. Inside, the air is filtered cooled to a precise 68 degrees and smells faintly of ozone and static electricity. Outside, beyond the thick pane of reinforced glass, the city is burning. Well, not burning literally, not yet. But the temperature of the crowd down there is rising fast. I stood at the main console looking down at the sea of heads. From this height, people lose their individuality. They become currents of water, flowing around obstacles, damming up at closed gates, swirling in eddies of confusion. Today, the water was angry. Code red in Sector 4. A voice crackled in my earpiece. It was Miller, my floor chief. They're trying to pry the doors open on the southbound shuttle. We need more bodies. Negative on the bodies, Miller, I said. My voice was calm. It always is. If you send uniforms into that crush, you'll trigger a riot. Vent the crowd to the West Hall. Open gates 6 through 9. Give them somewhere to move. West Hall is maintenance only, Ms. Armstrong. West Hall is empty space. I corrected him. Open it. Now. I watched on the main monitor as the heavy steel shutters rolled up. The mass of people tight as a fist began to relax as they flooded into the new space. The tension on the floor dropped, if only by a fraction. I took a sip of my water. It was lukewarm. I adjusted the cuffs of my jacket. I wear tailored suits, charcoal or navy cut sharp enough to draw blood. They are my armor. When I walk through the administrative offices, the junior schedulers part like the Red Sea. They respect me because I know the schedule better than the computer does. They fear me because I don't keep photos of a husband or children on my desk. I have no distractions. I have no tether. My life is logistics. It is the science of moving things from point A to point B without incident. If things stop moving, they rot. If people stop moving, they panic. I have built a very successful, very quiet life on the principle of continuous motion. But old habits die hard. On the corner of my desk, buried under a stack of routing manifests, sits an old police scanner. It's a relic archaic technology compared to the digital feeds on the wall, but I keep it running on low volume. It provides a jagged white noise rhythm to my day. Most people listen to music to focus. I listen to other people's emergencies. It reminds me that the chaos is out there and I am safe in here. Dispatch, we have a 1058 in the loading zone. The scanner hissed. Unattended luggage. I didn't flinch. Unattended luggage is usually a gym bag someone forgot. Copy that. Also check the north waiting area. Report of a separated minor. Looks like a lost kid. That one made me stop. My hand hovered over the trackball of my computer mouse. A separated minor. The cold air of the aquarium seemed to vanish. Suddenly, I wasn't 34 years old standing in a tower of glass and steel. I was 14. The memory didn't come back like a movie. It came back like a physical blow to the stomach. It was the smell. First diesel fumes, stale popcorn, and that heavy wet heat that only exists in a Georgia summer. It was a Greyhound station 3 states away from here. The air conditioning had broken down hours ago, and the air was thick enough to chew on. We had been traveling for 2 days. My father, David, was wearing a shirt with sweat stains blooming under the arms. My stepmother, Carla, was fanning herself with a folded bus schedule, her lips pressed into a thin white line. "There's a mix-up with the tickets," Dad had said. He wouldn't look at me. He was looking at a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "They're saying we have to pay a supplement for the transfer. Carla and I have to go to the counter and sort it out." I was sitting on a molded plastic bench that dug into my spine. I had my backpack on my lap. "I can come with you." "No," Carla said. Her voice was sharp brittle. "Stay with the bags. There's too many people over there. Just sit here. Watch the bags. We'll be right back." I nodded. I was a good kid. I did what I was told. I watched them walk away. They moved fast, faster than you walk when you're just going to a ticket counter. They wove through the crowd, heads down. They didn't go to the ticket counter. I saw them push through the heavy glass doors that led to the taxi stand. I stood up, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I saw my father throw his hand up. A yellow cab screeched to the curb. He opened the door for her. He paused for a second, just 1 second, and looked back toward the glass doors. I don't know if he could see me through the glare. I'll never know. Then he got in and the car pulled away, merging into the traffic. I sat back down. I told myself they were just going to get cash from an ATM. I told myself they were going to a different office. I told myself 1,000 lies as the sun went down and the depot lights flickered on, buzzing like angry hornets. I sat there for 12 hours. I sat there until the janitor mopped around my feet. I sat there until a security guard with a kind, tired face squatted down in front of me and asked, "Sweetheart, is anybody coming for you?" The shame of that moment was worse than the fear. The realization that I was something to be discarded, unclaimed freight. Director Armstrong. The voice in my earpiece snapped me back to the present. I blinked, the Georgia heat dissolving back into the sterile chill of the control room. My heart was racing, a cold sweat pricking at the back of my neck. "Go ahead," I said. My voice sounded steady. "It's amazing what you can fake." "We've got a situation near Gate 4. The crowd is getting aggressive. They're storming the barricades." I shook my head, clearing the cobwebs of the past. I focused on my job. "Pull up camera 4. I toggled the joystick on my console. The main screen flickered, switching views to a high-angle shot of Gate 4. It was a mess. People were shouting, shoving, trying to force their way onto a bus that was already full. The strike had made people desperate. Desperate people do ugly things. I zoomed in, looking for the instigators. I needed to see faces. If I could identify the ringleaders, I could direct security to pluck them out surgically. The camera whirred, focusing on the center of the crush. And then I froze. My breath caught in my throat, a ragged hitch that felt like swallowing glass. There in the middle of the mob was a man in a gray coat. He was clutching a cheap brown suitcase to his chest like a life preserver. His hair was white now, thinning on top, and his posture was stooped. But I knew the shape of those shoulders. Beside him, clinging to his arm, was a woman with dyed blonde hair that was growing out at the roots. She was weeping, her mouth open in a silent scream as the crowd jostled her. She looked small, frail. David and Carla. They looked 20 years older, worn down by life, their faces etched with the kind of hard living that offers no mercy. They looked terrified. The crowd surged. A young man in a hoodie shoved David, knocking him off balance. My father, the man who had walked away and left me on a plastic bench, stumbled, nearly falling under the trampling feet of the mob. Carla grabbed his coat, pulling him back up, her eyes wide with panic. They were trapped. They were vulnerable. And they were right in the palm of my hand. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the communication button. I could leave them there. I could let the crowd swallow them whole. It would be easy. It would be justice. But the girl inside me, the 14-year-old girl sitting in the heat, whispered something else. I leaned into the microphone. Security, I said, and my voice was ice. I have a priority target in Sector 4. Priority target. Miller's voice crackled in my ear, confusion bleeding through the static. Director, we've got 3,000 angry commuters pushing against the fire doors in the South Hall. We're dealing with a potential stampede. You want us to focus on 2 geriatrics in Sector 4. I gave you an order, Miller, I said, my finger tracing the outline of the 2 figures on the high-definition screen. Isolate them. Do not engage yet. Just get eyes on them. I want a dedicated feed channel 6. I didn't wait for his confirmation. I knew he would do it. Miller was ex-military. He hated my methods, but he loved the chain of command. I swiveled my chair, pulling the keyboard closer. The aquarium hummed around me, a low-frequency vibration of servers and air scrubbers that usually settled my nerves. Now it felt like the quiet before a demolition. I typed in a command string to override the standard security protocols for Camera 4B. The lens on the far wall of the terminal whirred, zooming in past the blurred heads of the mob, cutting through the chaos until the frame was filled entirely with them. David and Carla. Up close, the years had been cruel. My father's face, once full and flushed with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him a favor, was now gray and sagging. The jowls around his jaw were covered in white stubble. He was wearing a wool coat that looked expensive from a distance, but moth-eaten at the collar in 4K resolution. Carla looked worse. Her vanity had calcified into a mask of panic. She was clutching a designer knockoff purse to her chest, her eyes darting around the terminal like a trapped animal looking for a hole in the fence. I leaned back, steepled my fingers, and watched. This was the assessment. In logistics, before you move a volatile asset, you have to determine its stability. You have to know if it will explode in transit. On the screen, the crowd surged again. A young girl, maybe 16, with a heavy backpack slung over one shoulder, was shoved sideways by the crush. She stumbled into Carla's space. I watched, holding my breath. This was the variable test. Carla didn't offer a hand. She didn't check to see if the girl was okay. Instead, Carla's face twisted into a snarl. She drove her elbow into the girl's ribs, shoving her back into the mass of bodies to clear a few more inches of space for herself near the locked gate. Watch it. I could almost hear her screech through the mute video. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Unchanged, self-preservation above all else. The same instinct that allowed a woman to leave a 14-year-old stepdaughter in a bus depot because she was an inconvenience to a new marriage. Then it was David's turn. He saw a transit authority worker in a high-visibility vest trying to resecure a barrier near the wall. The worker was young, exhausted, sweat dripping off his nose. David approached him. I zoomed in tighter. I saw the move before he made it. It was a move I had seen him pull 100 times in my childhood, at restaurants, at mechanics, at rental agencies. The gentleman's agreement. David leaned in close, putting a hand on the young worker's shoulder, a false fatherly intimacy. With his other hand, he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a bill. It looked like a 20, maybe a 50. He tried to press it into the worker's palm, keeping it low, hidden between their bodies. The bribe. The worker looked at the money, then at David. He didn't take it. He slapped David's hand away hard. I saw David recoil, clutching his wrist, his face crumbling from arrogance into fear. The worker said something sharp. I read his lips, backed the hell up and spat on the concrete near David's polished shoes. David retreated to Carla, looking small, defeated. They were not victims of circumstance. They were the same people they had always been, just with less leverage. Status director? Miller asked. I looked at the screen. The crowd was getting denser. The ambient heat map showed the temperature rising in that sector. If the mob broke the line, David and Carla would be trampled. They were too slow, too weak to survive the stampede. I had a choice. Option A, do nothing. Let the natural flow of the terminal take its course. It wasn't murder. It was inaction. It was allowing the universe to balance the ledger. Option B, clear the sector. Use the loudspeakers, deploy the riot control team, and disperse the crowd. They would be safe, but so would everyone else. They would slip away into the night anonymous, unpunished, and unlearned. I rejected both. I reached for the red binder on the corner of my desk. Standard operating procedures. I didn't need to open it. I wrote half of it. I flipped the cover of a guarded switch on my console. Miller, I said, my voice dropping an octave, stripping away any room for argument. Initiate Protocol 9 in Sector 4. Targets identified. There was a pause on the line. Protocol 9 was not a standard crowd control measure. It was a high-risk extraction designation reserved for VIPs under threat or high-value detainees. It required a physical intercept. Protocol 9, Miller asked. You want to extract them? Are they VIPs? They are liabilities, I said. Send the heavy team, not the customer service reps. Send the enforcement unit. I want them removed from the floor immediately. Understood. Enforcement moving in. I watched the screen. The doors to the security annex burst open. 2 officers, clad in tactical vests and matte black helmets, cut through the crowd. They didn't say, "Excuse me." They moved with the unstoppable momentum of a freight train. David and Carla saw them coming. I saw the relief wash over their faces first. They thought they were being rescued. They thought their status, white older dressed in coats, had finally been recognized by the powers that be. David straightened his tie. Carla wiped her eyes. Then the reality hit. The first officer didn't offer a hand. He grabbed David by the upper arm, his grip visibly tight. David flinched, his mouth opening in protest. The second officer boxed Carla in, pointing a gloved finger toward the service exit. It wasn't a rescue. It was a rendition. Audio, I commanded. Give me their mics. The room filled with the chaotic noise of the terminal, overlaid with the heavy breathing of the officers. Know who I am? David was shouting, his voice thin and reedy. Get your hands off me. I was just asking for help. Move, the officer barked. Walk, now. David, Carla shrieked. David, they're arresting us. Do something. I didn't do anything. David stammered, stumbling as he was marched forcibly toward the gray steel door, labeled Authorized Personnel Only. That worker lying, I didn't touch him. They were pushed through the door. The heavy steel slammed shut behind them, cutting off the noise of the crowd instantly. On my screen, the camera view switched. They were now in the tunnels. The tunnels are the circulatory system of the terminal miles of concrete corridors running beneath the city, lined with steam pipes, high-voltage conduits, and the incessant rhythmic thrum of the ventilation fans. It is a place for machines, not people. The lighting is harsh yellow sodium vapor that makes skin look jaundiced. I watched them walk. The officers marched them briskly, their boots echoing on the concrete. David was panting, struggling to keep up with the pace, dragging his suitcase, which bounced and skidded on the uneven floor. Carla was clutching his coat, looking back over her shoulder as if waiting for a lawyer to materialize out of the steam. "Where are you taking us?" David wheezed. "I demand to see a manager. I have a heart condition." "Quiet," the lead officer said. His voice echoed down the corridor. "Eyes front." I tracked them through Sector B, then Sector C. They were moving deeper into the facility, away from the exits, away from the light. I could see the terror setting in. This wasn't a ticket dispute anymore. In their minds, this was something darker. They were in the bowels of the city, in a place where people disappeared. I felt a cold, hard knot of satisfaction in my stomach. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling of a scale finally balancing. They had used their power, their adulthood, their money, their autonomy to trap me in a station 20 years ago. Now I was using my power to trap them. "Approach the holding area," I radioed the team. "Room 404. Room 404 was not a holding cell. It was an interrogation room used for internal investigations, employee theft, sabotage, major accidents. It was soundproof, windowless, and designed to make the occupant feel small. On the screen, the officers stopped at the heavy metal door. One swiped a keycard. The light turned green. "Inside," the officer ordered. "Please," Carla begged, her voice cracking. "We have money. We can pay the fine. Just let us go." Inside. They were shoved into the room. The door clicked shut. I switched the feed to the interior camera of room 404. The room was stark white. There was a single metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. A large two-way mirror dominated one wall. David collapsed into one of the chairs, burying his face in his hands. "Oh, God," he moaned. "They saw the money, Carla. They saw me try to pay the guy. They're going to charge me with bribery. I'm going to jail." "You idiot," Carla hissed, pacing the small room, her heels clicking frantically. "I told you not to do it. You always think you can buy your way out of things you can't afford." "Stop it," David snapped, looking up. "We're in this together, are we?" Carla spun on him. "Because if they charge you, I'm not going down for it. I didn't offer him anything." I watched them turn on each other. It took less than 5 minutes of pressure for their partnership to fracture. They were rats in a bucket. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I checked my reflection in the darkened monitor. My face was composed. My hair was perfect. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the person in charge. I picked up a clipboard. I didn't need it, but props are important in theater. "Miller," I said into the headset, "I'm going down. Keep the floor clear. Nobody enters that corridor until I say so. Copy that, director. You want backup at the door? No. I said walking toward the elevator that would take me down into the depths. I can handle this. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the basement levels. As the doors closed, shutting out the hum of the aquarium, I felt the air pressure change. I was descending into the underworld to meet the ghosts who had left me there, but I wasn't bringing a flashlight. I was bringing the fire. I didn't enter the room immediately. I stood outside the heavy steel door of room 404, watching them through the one-way glass. The audio feed was still running in my earpiece. Inside the breakdown was total. David was slumped in the metal chair, his head in his hands, murmuring about his pension and the bribery charge. Carla was pacing the 6-foot span of the room, her heels clicking a frantic staccato rhythm on the concrete. She was checking her phone, but I knew she wouldn't have a signal down here. The tunnels were a dead zone. They can't keep us here, she hissed, her voice vibrating with that specific frequency of entitled panic. It's kidnapping. I'll sue the city. I'll sue the mayor. Shut up, Carla, David moaned. Just shut up. We're in trouble. I adjusted my cuffs. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I took a breath, held it for 4 seconds, and exhaled for 4. Protocol. I swiped my key card. The lock disengaged with a loud mechanical clack. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The air was colder here than in the hallway. The hum of the ventilation system was louder, a constant droning pressure against the eardrums. Carla stopped pacing. David looked up, his eyes bloodshot and watery. I didn't look at them. I walked to the end of the table and placed my clipboard down with a deliberate, sharp snap. I remained standing. In a negotiation, the person sitting down has already lost. State your names for the record, I said. My voice was flat, stripped of accent or inflection. It was the voice of the institution. Carla stepped forward, clutching her purse like a shield. Finally, are you the manager? This is an outrage. Those thugs dragged us down here like criminals. My husband has a heart condition. Names, I repeated. I didn't blink. David sat up straighter, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He looked at my suit, the quality of the fabric, the ID badge clipped to my lapel that read, Director of Operations. He saw authority. He instinctively tried to appease it. David, he stammered. David and Carla Vance, look, Miss Director, there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to offer that man money. I was confused. The heat, the crowd. You are currently being detained for attempted bribery of a municipal employee and incitement of a riot, I said, looking down at the blank paper on my clipboard. Under the Emergency Transit Act, these are felonies. The word felony hit the room like a grenade. Carla gasped. David's face went the color of ash. Felony, Carla screeched. We were just trying to get on a bus. We're elderly. We're victims here. You were observed shoving a minor, I said, looking up for the first time. I locked eyes with her. And you were observed attempting to bypass federal security protocols. Why are you in the city? We were passing through, David said quickly. Medical appointment, a specialist. We're just trying to get home. Where is home? North, 4 hours north. Do you have family in the city? I asked. Someone we can call to verify your character. The question hung in the air. David shifted in his seat. He looked at Carla. A silent communication passed between them, a flash of shared history, a buried secret. No, David said, his voice dropping to a whisper. No family, we're alone. I felt a sharp, hot spike in my chest, but I pushed it down into the cold pit of my stomach. They had done it again, 20 years later, and they were still erasing me. That's interesting, I said. I tapped my pen against the clipboard. Tap, tap, tap. Because the database shows a previous address for you in this city, 20 years ago. You lived on Elm Street. David frowned. He squinted at me, trying to process how I had that information. The lighting in the room was harsh, casting deep shadows over my eyes. But as I leaned forward, the shadows shifted. We moved, Carla snapped. A long time ago. What does that have to do with anything? It has to do with logistics, I said. Logistics is about knowing what you carry and what you leave behind. I took off my glasses. I folded them slowly and placed them in my breast pocket. I let the silence stretch tight as a piano wire until David's breathing became the loudest thing in the room. Tell me, David, I said, and I dropped the professional cadence. I let the South slip back into my voice just a fraction. Did you ever fix that mix-up with the tickets? David froze. It wasn't a sudden realization. It was a slow, creeping horror. He stared at me. He looked at my chin, then my nose, then, finally, my eyes. He was looking for the 14-year-old girl and the 34-year-old woman. He was looking for the pigtails and the fear. Instead, he found a mirror reflecting his own cowardice. Sophie, he whispered. The name sounded foreign in his mouth, like a word from a dead language. Carla whipped her head around to look at him, then back at me. What who? It's me, Dad, I said. I didn't smile. I'm the director. This is my terminal. You're in my house. Carla let out a short, hysterical laugh. Sophie, that's impossible. She's gone. I finished for her. Left on a bench, abandoned. David stood up slowly, his legs shaking. Sophie, my God, look at you. You're running this place. He took a step toward me, his hands reaching out, trembling. We didn't know. We thought, sit down, I ordered. I didn't raise my voice, but the command slammed him back into his chair. We looked for you, Carla lied. The lie came out so fast, so practiced, it was almost impressive. We came back, didn't we, David? We came back, but you were gone. Security said you ran off. Don't, I said. Do not lie to me. Not here. I have the logs. Carla, I pulled the archive. No inquiries were made. No missing persons report filed. You got in that taxi, and you didn't look back until you were across the state line. You don't understand, Carla shouted, her fear transmuting into aggression. She stepped toward the table, slamming her hand down. You have no idea what we were going through. We were broke. We were drowning. We couldn't take care of ourselves, let alone a sullen teenager who hated me. So you liquidated the asset, I said coldly. We did what we had to do to survive, she screamed. And look at you, you did fine. You're wearing a $2,000 suit. You're the boss. We did you a favor. A favor, I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Let me walk you through the logistics of that favor, Carla. I walked around the table, closing the distance. I circled them like a shark. 14 years old, no money, no ID, sleeping in a shelter with addicts and runaways for 3 weeks before the state stepped in. 2 years in a foster home where the father liked to lock the refrigerator at night. I didn't survive because of you. I survived in spite of you. I stopped behind David's chair. I leaned down, my mouth inches from his ear. Why didn't you fight for me, Dad? David put his head on the table and sobbed. It was a pathetic, broken sound. I was weak, he choked out. She said it was the only way. She said we'd come back for you when we got settled. But the time, it just went. And I was ashamed. I was so ashamed. Ashamed, I repeated. Shame is a useless emotion. It doesn't move cargo, it doesn't pay bills, and it doesn't fix what you broke. Sophie, please, David begged, looking up, tears streaming down his gray stubble. We're old. We're sick. I have a pacemaker. We just want to go home. Help us, please. You're my daughter. I am the director of logistics, I corrected him. And right now you are a bottleneck in my system. I looked at them, really looked at them. I searched for the anger that had fueled me for 2 decades. I searched for the desire to hurt them, to crush them, to throw them into a cell and throw away the key. I found the anger. It was there, hot and bright, but underneath it I found something else. Pity. They were pathetic. They were small, selfish people who had lived small, selfish lives, and now they were terrified and alone in a concrete box. Destroying them wouldn't fix me. It would just make me like them. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. I walked back to the head of the table. I picked up my clipboard. I checked my watch. I have a terminal to run, I said, and you have overstayed your welcome by 20 years. What are you going to do? Carla asked, her voice trembling. The fight had gone out of her. She looked small again. I tapped my earpiece. Miller, I said, clearly staring right into David's eyes. The interrogation is concluded. The subjects are non-compliant and pose a security risk. David gasped. Sophie, no. Transport is ready. I continued into the mic. Get them out of my sight. Remove them from the premises immediately. Protocol 0. Protocol 0 didn't exist. I made it up. But to them, it sounded like the end. Wait! David stood up, reaching for me. You can't just throw us out. It's a riot out there. We'll be killed. You made your choice, I said. Now I'm making mine. I turned my back on them. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to explain, to demand more apologies. But I knew that for the lesson to stick, they had to feel the drop. They had to feel the abandonment. Guards, I barked. The heavy door swung open. The 2 tactical officers stepped in, filling the room. Remove them, I said, walking past the officers without looking back. Sophie, Sophie. David's screams followed me into the hallway. Don't do this. Don't leave us. I walked down the corridor, the heels of my shoes striking the concrete with military precision. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I let the heavy steel door slam shut behind me, cutting off their cries. I stood in the silence of the hallway for a moment, my hand trembling slightly. I balled it into a fist until the shaking stopped. I had sentenced them to terror. Now I had to arrange the mercy. I walked back to the elevator, my heart rate finally beginning to decelerate. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was draining away, leaving behind a hollow metallic taste in my mouth. It was the taste of victory, but it felt remarkably like ash. I rode the lift back up to the aquarium. When the doors slid open, the hum of the control room washed over me, the familiar comforting drone of fans and processors. My staff was still working, the crisis heads down, moving buses through the gridlock of the strike. They didn't look up. To them, I had just stepped out for a coffee break. They had no idea I had just performed an autopsy on my own past. I sat down at my console, and put my headset back on. "Status, Miller?" I asked. "Subject extraction in progress," Miller replied. His voice was clipped professional. "They're at the north loading dock. Transport is 1 minute out." I keyed in the command for Monitor 9. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy black and white feed of the loading bay. It was a bleak industrial cavern open to the night on one side. The storm had broken directly over the terminal. Rain was coming down in sheets visible on the camera as streaks of white interference. It slashed sideways, driven by the wind soaking the concrete ramp in seconds. The service door opened. The two tactical officers emerged first. Then came David and Carla. They looked like refugees from a war zone. David was struggling with his suitcase, the wheels catching on the wet grating. He stumbled, nearly going down on one knee, but the officer behind him didn't offer a hand. He just waited, silent and imposing, for the old man to right himself. Carla was shivering. Her coat was thin, a fashion statement, not a utility, and the wind was whipping her hair across her face. She looked small. The arrogance she had worn in the interrogation room, the entitlement that had allowed her to scream at me, had evaporated. All that was left was a frightened woman standing on a dark dock, waiting for a punishment she didn't understand. I watched, mesmerized by the image. Then David did something that made my breath catch. He saw Carla shivering. He dropped the handle of his suitcase. With shaking hands, he unbuttoned his wool coat, the one with the frayed collar, and took it off. He draped it over Carla's shoulders. He was left in just his dress shirt, instantly soaked by the freezing rain, his wet shirt clinging to his pathetic, bony frame. I stared at the screen. My hand tightened around the armrest of my chair. He never gave me his coat, I thought. Not once. In the bus depot 20 years ago, when the air conditioning failed and I was shivering from shock and hunger, he hadn't offered me anything. He had just walked away. But he gave it to her. It was a complication I didn't want. I wanted them to be monsters, pure, unadulterated villains. But monsters don't give up their coats. Weak men do. Weak men who love the wrong things or love the right things exclusively to the detriment of everything else. He loved her. He just hadn't loved me enough. "Transport on site," Miller announced. On the screen, headlights cut through the deluge. A vehicle pulled onto the ramp. It wasn't a police cruiser. It wasn't a marked transit van. It was a black, heavy-duty SUV with tinted windows and reinforced run-flat tires. It looked like something used by a Black Ops government agency, or the kind of car that picks people up and takes them to places they never come back from. The SUV stopped. The engine idled, pumping white exhaust into the cold air. The driver's door opened. Sal stepped out. Sal Manita is a legend in the transit authority. He's 60 years old, 6'4", and built like a vending machine. He spent 30 years as a transit cop before retiring to run private security for the executive branch. He has a scar that runs from his ear to his chin, a souvenir from a knife fight on the subway in the 80s. He wears dark aviator sunglasses, even at night, even in the rain. I had called him personally before I went down to the interrogation room. I told him I needed a ghost run, off the books, high priority, no questions asked. Sal walked around the front of the SUV. He moved with a heavy, dangerous grace. He ignored the rain hammering against his bald head. On the audio feed, I could hear the wind howling, but Sal's voice cut through it like a foghorn. "Vance," Sal barked. He didn't shout. He just projected. David looked at the massive man, then at the black car. then back at the tactical officers who were blocking the door back inside. Panic flared in his eyes. "Who are you?" David shouted over the rain. "Where are the police? We want the police." Sal didn't answer. He walked up to David, grabbed the handle of the wet suitcase, and lifted it as if it were filled with feathers. He tossed it into the back of the SUV. "Get in," Sal said. "Where are you taking us?" Carla cried, clutching David's coat around her. "You can't just take us. This is America." Sal stopped. He lowered his sunglasses just an inch, looking over the rim with eyes that had seen everything this city had to offer. The blood, the births, the fights and the jumpers. "Boss's orders," Sal growled. "Don't make me ask twice." It was a performance, of course. I knew Sal. Under that leather jacket, he was the man who brought donuts to the dispatchers every Friday. He was the man who had found me crying in the security office 20 years ago, who had given me a vending machine sandwich and told me, "Kid, sometimes the trash takes itself out." But David and Carla didn't know that. To them, Sal was the executioner. To them, the boss was a vengeful deity who had just ordered them to be erased. David looked at the open door of the dark SUV. He looked at the officers behind him. He realized he had no leverage, no money, no rights, no way out. "Please," David whispered to Sal, his voice barely audible over the microphone. "Just don't hurt her. She didn't do anything. It was me." Sal didn't blink. "In the car. Now." Defeated, David nodded. He guided Carla toward the vehicle. He helped her climb into the back seat. Then he climbed in after her. Sal slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the concrete bay. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, and the black SUV peeled away, disappearing into the curtain of rain. I watched the taillights fade on the monitor. The loading dock was empty again, save for the two officers who were already lighting cigarettes, the job done. I sat back in my chair. The office was quiet. "Target has left the facility," Miller said. "Protocol 9 is complete." "Thank you, Miller," I said softly. "Clear the channel." I took off my headset and placed it on the desk. My hands were steady now. I had terrified them. I had stripped them of their dignity. I had made them feel the absolute crushing weight of helplessness that I had carried for 2 decades. I had balanced the equation, but now came the hard part, the part that wasn't about logistics or revenge, the part that was about who I wanted to be when I walked out of this building. I picked up the phone and dialed Sal's mobile number. "Go for Sal." His voice came through the speakerphone, calm and deep. "They're in?" I asked. "Secured," Sal said. "They're shaking like leaves back here, boss. The lady is praying. You want me to scare 'em some more?" "No," I said. I looked at the rain lashing against the glass of the aquarium. "No more fear, Sal. Turn up the heat. Drive safe." "Copy that. Destination home," I said. "Take them all the way home." I hung up the phone. The scanner on my desk crackled with a new report, a stalled bus in Sector 2. The city was still moving. The chaos was still waiting. I pulled my keyboard closer. I had work to do. Inside the black SUV, the silence was louder than the storm. The vehicle was a sealed capsule smelling of leather and conditioned air, cutting through the chaos of the night. In the back seat, David and Carla huddled together. Carla was shaking a low, constant vibration that traveled through the seat. She was murmuring the Lord's Prayer. Under her breath, her eyes squeezed shut. David stared out the window. The tinted glass turned the city into a smear of gray and charcoal. He watched the streetlights flicker past 1, 2, 3 like a countdown. He gripped the door handle, his knuckles white, waiting for the turn. He knew how these things worked. He had seen the movies. He expected the driver to turn down an alley, or head toward the docks, or drive to some empty industrial lot where the debt would be paid in blood. But the turn never came. Sal drove with both hands on the wheel, his silhouette a hulking shadow against the dashboard lights. He bypassed the riots in Sector 4. He wove through the gridlock of the stalled buses in Sector 2, mounting the curb with the heavy suspension to skirt a barricade. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying in its efficiency. Then the scenery changed. The concrete canyons of the financial district gave way to the lower skyline of the suburbs. The streetlights became further apart. The frantic, crushing energy of the city began to bleed away, replaced by the dark, wet expanse of the interstate. David sat up straighter. He recognized the sign passing overhead. Interstate 95 North. North, David whispered. His voice was raspy. He's going north. Carla opened her eyes. What? We're on the highway, David said, turning to look at the back of Sal's head. We're leaving the city. Sal didn't speak. He just merged into the center lane, accelerating until the speedometer hit 70. The hum of the tires on the wet asphalt was a steady, rhythmic drone. It wasn't the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a journey. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The city was just aglow in the rearview mirror now. Sal reached toward the passenger seat. David flinched, pulling Carla back, expecting a weapon. Instead, Sal grabbed a plastic bag and tossed it blindly into the back seat. It landed on David's lap with a soft thud. Eat, Sal rumbled. David stared at the bag. He opened it slowly. Inside were 2 turkey sandwiches from the gourmet deli in the terminal, the kind wrapped in wax paper that cost $15 apiece. There were 2 bottles of spring water and a handful of granola bars. I don't understand, David stammered. Boss figured you haven't eaten since the strike started. Sal said, his eyes fixed on the road. There's a cooler in the back if you need more water. It's a 4-hour drive. 4 hours, Carla asked, her voice trembling. That's how long it takes to get home. I know, Sal said. I have the address. The reality of it hit David like a physical blow. The adrenaline that had been holding him together snapped. He wasn't going to jail. He wasn't going to be beaten in an alley. He was being chauffeured. He looked down at the sandwich in his hand, his stomach cramped with sudden violent hunger. He tore the wrapper open and took a bite, chewing frantically. He handed the other one to Carla. They ate in silence, devouring the food with the desperate, undignified hunger of people who had been scared for their lives. When they were finished, a heavy guilt settled over the car. David wiped his mouth with his sleeve. He looked at the back of Sal's neck. He felt a need to pay, to balance the ledger. He couldn't accept this charity. It felt too much like a judgment. He fumbled with his left wrist. He undid the clasp of his watch, a gold-plated timepiece he had bought when he retired. It was the only thing of value he had left. Sir, David said, leaning forward. Mr. Driver, I want you to have this. He held the watch out between the front seats. It's good gold. It's worth something. For the trouble, please. Sal glanced at the watch in the rearview mirror. He didn't take his hands off the wheel. Put it away, Sal said. No, please, David insisted, his hand shaking. I can't pay the fare. I don't have the cash. Take the watch. Sal laughed. It was a low, dry sound. You think this is a cab ride. You think you can afford this ride? Sal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He handed it back to David. The boss covered it, Sal said. Fare fuel and toll, plus a hefty tip for me not to throw you out on the shoulder back at mile marker 10. David took the envelope. It was heavy. It bore the embossed silver seal of the Metropolitan Transit Authority office of the director. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a printed itinerary. It showed a private car service booking one-way door-to-door. The cost listed at the bottom was $600. Stamped across the total in red ink was the word paid. Clipped to the receipt was a small handwritten note on heavy cardstock. The handwriting was sharp, angular, and precise. David turned on the overhead reading light. Carla leaned in, reading over his shoulder. You taught me that survival is about leaving the weak behind. I learned a different lesson. No one gets left behind at my terminal. Not even you. Go home. Stay there. S.A. David stared at the initials. He ran his thumb over the ink. He looked out the window at the passing darkness, at the rain that was finally beginning to let up. He didn't say a word. He just pulled Carla's head onto his shoulder, closed his eyes, and wept. Back in the aquarium, the lights were dimmed. The crisis was breaking. The strike leaders had agreed to a tentative deal 20 minutes ago, and the buses were beginning to roll out of the depots. The red warning lights on the main board were turning green one by one, like stars coming out after a storm. I sat alone at my console, the rest of the room empty as the night shift swapped over. On my tertiary monitor, a single green GPS dot was moving steadily north, tracing a line along the artery of the interstate. I watched it move. Every inch it traveled was another pound of weight lifted off my chest. I could have destroyed them. I had the law, the money, and the justification. I could have left them in that cell to rot for the weekend. I could have left them on the street to be trampled. It would have been fair. It would have been equal exchange. But logistics isn't about equality. It's about flow. It's about clearing blockages so the system can function. Holding on to the hate would have been a blockage. It would have been a piece of luggage I had to carry every day, checking it at every station, worrying about it, guarding it. By sending them home, I wasn't forgiving them. I wasn't absolving them. I was processing them. I was shipping them out so I didn't have to store them in my head anymore. I watched the dot cross the county line. Director, I looked up. Miller was standing in the doorway holding 2 coffees. He looked exhausted. We're back to 80% capacity, he said. The morning rush should be smooth. You want to go home? Get some sleep. I looked at the screen one last time. The dot was gone, moved off the edge of the map range. I reached out and right-clicked on the file named Vance D, Security Risk. I selected Delete. Confirm deletion, the system asked. I clicked Yes. The file vanished. The screen was clear. The board was green. No Miller, I said, taking the coffee from him and feeling the warmth seep into my cold fingers. I'm good. The system is flowing. Let's get back to work. Sofia chose dignity over destruction. Have you ever had to show mercy to someone who didn't deserve it? Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. We truly appreciate you being here. There are even more captivating stories waiting for you right on your screen. Please click one now so you don't miss the ending. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. This has been a story from Revenge Radiance. We'll see you next time.